There's always a need for something in the world, something that always needs to be done but is overlooked by the masses. Volunteer work is often swept under the rug because it takes time out of your day and you don't get paid for your work. Personally, I felt that way for a really long time. Even whenever my mother asked me to join her for a volunteer initiation assembly at our local humane society, I went with her because she was very persuasive, and we got a very nice tour of the facility. And I realized just how important volunteer work was whenever we stopped in the animal recovery area. The animal recovery area was a very small shed that had a bunch of animals that had either previously given birth or were recovering from illness and disease. There was this one dog that had just given birth named Pilgrim, who was incredibly skittish around all the other volunteers and workers, but out of nowhere, Pilgrim ran right over to me, forced me on the ground, and then laid in my lap. The workers continued to tell us about the area while the other volunteers stared at me as I just pet the dog. They left me behind and let me stay with the dog for as long as Pilgrim needed. And that's whenever I realized that volunteer work is a really fulfilling time. It's an incredibly fulfilling use of your time. Throughout my time at the Humane Society, I've spent a lot of time with the dogs, mainly playing with them in the pens behind the facility. They need a lot of exercise and socialization in order to become better pets in the future. So that way they can get along with other people, other animals, and generally be more adoptable. Whenever the pens are full, we take them out back and we take them for walks around the large area. There's a very nice stone mill right nearby that you can take the dogs on a walk for. You can teach them basic commands like sit, stay, and follow. After playing with the dogs, I like to wind down messing around with the cats. There are a bunch of themed rooms that usually have 2 to 4 cats in them, usually from the same litter. The cat part is my favorite because they're so calm and sometimes warm up to you. Recently I went into a room with about 3 10-week-old kittens who were touch-starved. One of the cats climbed inside of my inner coat pocket and fell asleep. And the Humane Society even has adoption events. Last Christmas, we brought about 6 dogs to a local craft fair, and we were stationed right next to a mall Santa. So many kids would go up, get pictures with the mall Santa, and then pet the dogs, and some even got adopted. But one was left behind, one dog. And the mall Santa really warmed up to that dog. In between, like, the kids hopping up and taking pictures, he would just be petting that dog. And as the day went on, he began to realize that he didn't want to leave the dog behind, and so he ended up adopting it. And that was very nice. But less than a week ago, we found one 10-week-old puppy, a tiny black lab that our neighbors didn't know what to do with. They couldn't keep it because they already had 2 dogs who were vicious. They could not keep the dog feasibly. But as soon as we found out, my mother and I stepped up to take the dog to the Humane Society. We drove on down to their house, and I drove the car while she held the dog, and he was incredibly well behaved. The dog didn't even have a name by the time we got there. But we were really fighting ourselves not to adopt, because she would have been a more than welcome addition to the family. She looked exactly like our dog, and she wasn't microchipped, which made us even more sad, because we didn't have an excuse not to adopt her. But we ultimately handed her over to the Humane Society because we could not keep her. That's one of the parts about volunteer work that hurts. You can't keep all of the animals that you play with. Volunteer work is just good for the soul. I've made great connections with animals and benefited mentally from it. Scientific studies have shown that volunteer work is beneficial in helping the mental state of a person. And the people in the Humane Society are incredible people, too. I can always talk to them about issues or difficulties that may pop up, and I always leave the Humane Society just with a feeling of completeness. Because I know that these animals have benefited from me being there. I know that volunteering can get people out of their comfort zone, but it is an incredibly good thing to do. And I strongly encourage you to look for volunteer opportunities wherever you are. Soup kitchens and other food pantries are great for people in need, and they can help the community thrive even though they aren't seen very much. Youth organizations and senior organizations require much more help than you may think, and it's a good idea to see about supporting these local organizations. Mayo Clinic and helpguide.org both state that volunteer work reduces stress and helps to release dopamine, showing the legitimacy of all my previous claims. Volunteering can help save lives and better your own at the same time.